In the realm of the music business, there have been plenty of iconic and influential songwriting duos throughout the ages. John Lennon and Paul McCartney, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, Tristan Fabriani and Gus Mahler, the list goes on. Considering how many songwriting duos there have been in existence, a few of these pairs have certainly gone unnoticed. An obscure songwriting duo in particular that has piqued my interest as of late is that of Phil Galdston and Peter Thom. In this video, I will be talking about the brief yet intriguing history of Phil Galdston and Peter Thom's partnership and giving my piece on the albums that they released together, so let's just get right into it. Before Galdston and Thom had ever met, they were still greatly involved in the music and entertainment businesses. Phil Galdston, a New York native, had been part of several different bands since he was a teenager. Most notably, he was the lead singer of a band called the Schism 5 with their 1968 single Medal of Honor, which was an anti-war song. About 2 years after the Schism 5 fell apart, Galdston decided to form a new jazz rock band called Freeway, which appeared on The Tonight Show and was the first rock-oriented band to perform in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel's prestigious Empire Room. He would also arrange and produce for many different artists, notably for comedian Robert Klein with his first 3 albums. Peter Thom, on the other hand, was born in Scotland and moved to Montreal in 1944. Like Galdston, Thom was involved with many different bands during his high school years until he gave it up in college in order to become an engineer. This didn't last long, however, since he got back into music after winning a TV talent show. He went on to appear on the Canadian TV show The New Generation over the course of 2 years, and he also became part of the Montreal-based band The Strangers. Thom would eventually go off on his own, making a few singles and a solo LP during the late 60s and early 70s. Phil Galdston and Peter Thom finally met in 1973 when Thom joined Galdston's band, and like a certain jazz rock duo that I've never heard of or talked about, they got their start together as staff writers who wrote songs for other artists. The two scored their big hit in 1975 with the song Why Don't We Live Together, which won first prize at the American Song Festival and was featured on Barry Manilow's album Trying to Get the Feeling. Soon after this success, they were suggested to make their own music. Galdston and Thom decided to approach Warner Music, who were impressed with their work and decided to give them a shot at making their own album. This record would come to be known as American Gypsies. A brief disclaimer here. In the sections of the video where I talk about the albums, I will be talking about my personal opinions about them. However, I'm not a music critic, nor am I really well versed in music in general. The opinions said in this video come from an average, maybe even a below average listener, so take every subjective thing I say here with a grain of salt. I also apologize if anything I have said or am going to say comes off as pretentious, boring, or anything like that. I just wanted to talk about some cool stuff that I like and I didn't know how else to do it, so here we are. Anyway, let's continue. American Gypsies was Galdston and Thom's first real studio album, which was released in 1977. It was produced by Galdston and Thom themselves, along with John Simon, and recorded with a consistent band of session musicians, including saxophonist Timmy Capello, who you'll see again later. The album itself has plenty of themes presented throughout it, but most prominent are the themes of maturity, moving on, and the passage of time. Sound-wise, it's heavily rooted in soft rock as well as a bit of disco, but every song is varied in how they approach these genres. Many of the songs have this sort of simple yet complex style both lyrically and instrumentally, which is present in both of Galdston and Thom's albums. This one in particular is also composed of 2 different types of songs. Half of them are incredibly high energy and catchy, while the other half softens it up and shows both good lyricism and musicianship. There are plenty of moments in this album which showcase this dynamic pretty well, such as the transition from the rocking ode to music When the Silence Stops to the cool, calm, and almost folk-like title track, the way the album ends with the hectic and activistic disco anthem It Won't Work, which crossfades directly into A Life of Time, a ballad about the passage of time and how it flies by so fast, as well as the 5th song titled No One Gave Me Love, which starts off as an emotional piano ballad about experiencing love for the first time, but transforms into a disco-esque dance song about halfway through. Speaking of No One Gave Me Love, it is one of the 4 tracks from this album that is technically a cover. Rather, these 4 songs, Savannah Sunny Sunday, No One Gave Me Love, Why Don't We Live Together, and Everybody's Going Hollywood, were written by Galdston and Thom for other artists, specifically The Times, Tom Jones, Barry Manilow, and Mark Allen Trujillo respectively. Comparing the originals to Galdston and Thom's renditions, it's safe to say that the duo did a much better job, especially with Why Don't We Live Together. I just listened to them side by side.
We've both been burned before, now we know this love
covers are pretty great for the most part, with the exception being Savannah Sunny Sunday. To be blunt, it's the least good song out of Galdston and Thom's discography. The song has a similar premise as Florida Room by Donald Fagen, but rather than actually going to that sunny place, the narrator just imagines the whole thing. It's sardonic in a way, but it's not really helped by the slow and relaxing, yet still kind of boring instrumental that really doesn't go anywhere. It has grown on me a bit as I've listened to it more, but I think that it's still pretty mediocre. Anyway, the other 6 songs were written specifically for American Gypsies, and they're just as good as the covers. They really show Galdston and Thom's ability to write and record pretty fresh music. I especially love One More Time Around the Block, which is a high-key homage to 50s rock and roll, Sweepin' It Under, a nostalgic slow dance type song that shows the deterioration of relationships over time, and It Won't Work, which is an amped up disco song about the world's problems, specifically world hunger and pollution. These 3, along with No One Gave Me Love and Why Don't We Live Together, are the standout tracks of this album, but the other songs that aren't Savannah Sunny Sunday are still fantastic. The last thing I want to note here is Peter Thom's lead vocals, which are present throughout the entire album. They're good. Thom has a very impressive range and can change the tone of his voice from silky smooth to a bit raspy and almost aggressive, which fits in with the calm hyper dichotomy of the album perfectly. Despite the whole thing oozing with mid-70s cheesiness, I think that American Gypsies is a great album, and I highly recommend that you listen to it if you're a fan of soft rock. However, critics and the public of the time didn't seem to agree with that, considering that it sold very poorly on release. After the unfortunate commercial failure of American Gypsies, not much happened with Galdston and Thom. They were presumably kicked from the Warner Music label, and afterward they formed a band called the Ivory Coast. It consisted of the 2, along with Ernesto Provencher on the bass, Timmy Capello on the sax, Ross Levinson on strings, Michael Lauren on the drums, and Stephen Tarshis on the guitar. The Ivory Coast had a brief collaboration with songwriter Robert Kraft for his album Mood Swing in 1979, and really nothing else from what I could find. Galdston and Thom would eventually find a new opportunity to make their own music again when they were approached by sound engineers Phil Ramone and Elliot Shiner of A&R Recording to make another album. This time, however, they would be under the new moniker of Far Cry. The More Things Change was the duo's second album, which was released on April 2nd, 1980. During the production of The More Things Change, Ramone and Shiner put together an all-star set of musicians to record it. This includes, but definitely isn't limited to, drummers Bernard Pretty Purdy and Ed Green, guitarists Elliot Randall and Steve Kahn, keyboardist and arranger Rob Mounsey, and percussionist Ralph McDonald, all of them being incredibly talented session musicians during that time. There was also some talent sourced from Billy Joel's backing band, which were drummer Liberty DeVito and bassist Doug Stegmeyer. Donald Fagen of Steely Dan was also brought in from a few rooms down to do some backing vocals on 3 of the tracks. Phil Galdston also takes the lead vocals on 2 of the tracks. It's not as simple as that, and some things will never change, which I'll really talk about later. Like American Gypsies, the songs on this album have a distinct, simple yet complex style in the lyrics and music, but unlike its predecessor, The More Things Change is definitely more consistent in terms of genre since it leans a lot towards early 80s jazz rock, but every single song is still different despite this. Also, like American Gypsies, this album has a running theme of maturity, but here, it, along with much of the other subject matter, is treated with more pessimism and bleakness. The theme of maturity is perfectly established through the album's opener, The Hits Just Keep On Coming. This song details the story of a young man who simply can't deal with the emotions that come with growing up, so he tries to cover them up with songs that remind him of simpler times as he heads on home. The way that Galdston and Thom approach this theme shows how much they themselves have matured since American Gypsies, and it's even more apparent in the closer, but I'll get to that later. Anyway, The Hits Just Keep On Coming sets up the rest of the album pretty well with its rocking yet still jazzy sound and somewhat gloomy lyrics, and to be honest, the title couldn't be more relevant to this album. All 10 songs are nothing but complete and utter bangers, and it's already shown by the next song, El Dorado Escape. This song tells the intense story of a down-on-his-luck heroin dealer named Freddy who makes a deal with the police to bring in the Kingpin in exchange for a ride out of El Dorado.
Freddy starts sweaty as he meets the heat thrown at the deal. He said, I can bring in the Kingpin if a set of wheels is in the deep to disappear.
To match the edgy and almost cinematic lyrics, the instrumental is very hectic, complex, and rock-heavy with its drums, guitars, and synths. They all mix together to create such a solid second song. The third song, The One and Lonely, is a pretty simple breakup song. While it's not the best lyrically, it's the best instrumentally thus far. There are so many different sections in this song, which all come together to make a delightfully complex instrumental. I think that it's best shown in the chorus.
With your love, I was a champion.
It's a very extravagant song, which really shows the musical talent that went into this album. I like it. Not much else to say about it. The next song, on the other hand, titled Because It's There, is one I really want to talk about because it's one of my favorites out of the More Things Change. On its surface, this is quite a generic song about how you should always follow your heart, but as simple as it is, it's a sentiment that has stuck with me since it reminds me of why I make videos in the first place. I make these videos just because it's there. It's what I feel like doing and what I'm passionate about, and I don't need a better reason to do so. I know that sounds incredibly corny, but it happens to be incredibly true. Anyway, the song also has a bit of a Japanese city pop-esque sound with its horns, bass, and keyboards, which all flare to life during the chorus.
And I don't know why I'm still trying. I don't know why I still care.
Because It's There is definitely a standout of this album, which is quite an achievement when the entire album is great. Now, onto the best song of the album. The fifth song, It's Not As Simple As That, is also a standout song and my personal favorite out of Galdston and Thom's entire discography. Musically, I think that it's quite reminiscent of a Steely Dan song, specifically sounding like something that would have come out between Gaucho and The Nightfly. It's got a great blend of jazz and rock, as well as some other elements that add on to that combo, such as some subtle percussion, the horn section that comes in during the second verse, and the guitar solo that comes soon after it. The Steely Dan resemblance especially becomes apparent during the bridge, where Donald Fagen's backing vocals are most audible.
Love it or leave it. Make it or break it. Sure we could keep on trying, but should we have to try?
Along with this phenomenal instrumental are lyrics that are also inspired by the Dan, which aren't as cryptic as Fagen and Becker's lyrics, but they still capture the spirit of a typical Steely Dan tune with the element of cynicism. This song portrays an unstable relationship where both parties learn that being together is not as simple as black and white, which leads to some strife between them. These lyrics are ironically quite simple, but for what they are, they're great and work with the desperate tone of the instrumental very well. It's Not As Simple As That is the quintessential Galdston and Thom song, and if you were to listen to any one song that I mentioned in this video, it should be this one. Good song. Fight 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 is the sixth song on this album. Like Because It's There, it has something reminiscent of a Japanese type sound, but here it leans more towards the jazz fusion side of the spectrum, especially with the guitars, keys, and drums. They create very poppy and light-hearted vibes that clash directly with the lyrics. The song is about a toxic relationship where both parties, well, fight. Both people stop at nothing to make the other angry, but neither can seem to leave. I feel that this can best be seen in the bridge with the lines, "We're always head-to-head, toe-to-toe, but never heart-to-heart."
We're always head to head, toe to toe, but never heart to heart. A million miles apart.
The lyrics and the music come together to make a song that sounds happy but is somewhat dark, which is something I appreciate a lot in music, making Fight 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 yet another standout in a stream of excellent songs. Ocean Eyes is the seventh song, and the most new wave-esque of the bunch with its heavy use of synths. This one used to be one of my least favorites, but after listening to it over 60 times over the course of writing this video, it's safe to say that it's grown on me. This one details a really simple beach-centric love story which turns south when the lovers are dragged into the city, whatever that means. Like The One and Lonely, it doesn't have the best lyrics, but it's got such a great instrumental. Just listen to this section after the bridge. Ocean Eyes isn't one of my favorite songs from this album, but it's still a great song nonetheless. Then there's Suddenly Strings. To be frank, this one is the weakest link out of the 10 songs, but it's still quite far from bad. Again, this one has weaker lyrics, this time being about movie stars falling in love. It's very cheesy, and even though I can be a sucker for this sort of stuff sometimes, this one is a bit too much. They're redeemed for the most part by Peter Tom's incredibly smooth singing, which is always great.
I know the rest of the story. It's a Saturday matinee.
The instrumental is also pretty great with its string arrangements and varied percussion sections. Suddenly Strings may be the least good song out of the More Things Change, but I still think that it's pretty great. Tell Jack is the 9th song on this album, and like Fight Fight Fight, this one is a more joyful song with somewhat dark lyrics. Unlike that one though, Tell Jack is a lot more rock-based and definitely sarcastic about its subject matter. This song tells the story of 3 people, one of whom is the titular character of Jack and another is the narrator. The narrator of this tale simply despises Jack, so he devises a plan with a mutual friend to get rid of Jack by telling him to move to Los Angeles under the guise of encouraging him to live the American dream. This story is conveyed through some pretty funny lines, such as "Let him go now to the city of Angles," "This town ain't big enough for the both of us," and "I'll lead a brass band to JFK, we'll play California Dreamin' as he flies away." The phrases, "Oh, piss off now," and "hit the road, sucka," are even ad-libbed during the outro. Tell Jack is yet another pretty great song overall. Anyway, on to the final song. The closer of the More Things Change is aptly titled Some Things Will Never Change. This was the song that got me into Galdston and Thom to begin with, and is another one of their best songs in my opinion. For starters, it's probably the most complex out of the 10 songs, with many of the tracks being split off between the left and right channels, most notably with the guitar on the far left and the hi-hats in the far right. The way it's mixed is very intricate, and I find myself listening for something new every time I hear the song. The instrumental as a whole really gives off a sort of defeated and desperate tone, which fits perfectly with the bleak and pessimistic lyrics. Simply put, Some Things Will Never Change is about the loss of innocence. This song really digs into the naive illusions of the real world and the future that we see as children, which eventually become strange and abandoned fantasies as we mature. Speaking of maturity, this song really shows how much Galdston and Thom themselves have matured. Compare Some Things Will Never Change to A Life of Time, the closer of American Gypsies. A Life of Time positively looks back at so-called nights of love and passion with a nostalgic lens, even though a long time has passed. Some Things Will Never Change, on the other hand, nihilistically sees these memories as nothing but naive and youthful fantasies, which don't matter in the slightest now. The way I see it, Some Things Will Never Change represents Galdston and Thom's failure with American Gypsies. It shows the optimism the duo had when they first got started, which quickly turned into pessimism when their first album flopped. At the end of the day, the more things change, the more they stay the same, and this song perfectly captures that sentiment. Some Things Will Never Change is an incredible song that brings the More Things Change to a bitter close and has left me with the existential yet still literal question of, is this really it? Like American Gypsies, The More Things Change was released to little commercial and critical fanfare. This final failure ultimately led to Galdston and Thom parting ways. Galdston pressed forward in the music industry, writing and arranging songs for many different artists, and also became the director and music professor of songwriting at New York University, while Thom would go on to compose music for children's television, most notably for Sesame Street. As years would pass, the duo's studio albums would continue to be covered by the sands of time. They're most known now for The More Things Change, which got a few CD releases in Japan during the 2000s, a few blog posts written about it on the internet, and really nothing else. American Gypsies got a similar CD treatment to its successor, but it's even more obscure than The More Things Change. Galdston and Thom's career as a whole is quite obscure, considering that neither person has their own Wikipedia page, and most of the information for this video was pulled from the liner notes and credits of the albums. These two albums have a generally mixed reception among the online reviews that I could find about them, and I personally beg to differ. American Gypsies and The More Things Change are no masterpieces, but I think they're great albums that you should listen to. Well, I hope you enjoyed this shorter and more opinionated video of mine. I wanted to make this video to bring some attention to this somewhat obscure songwriting duo's short yet really good discography, and I hope it worked. What can I say? I think that I'm at least halfway decent at making videos about things that nobody cares about except me and maybe a few other people. Anyway, if I got anything wrong, if you have any suggestions for future videos, or if you disagree with anything I said in this video, please let me know in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this video, I hope you're doing well, and I'll see you in the next one.